running recording, and here we are. Yes. So we can see each other, we can hear each other. Let's proceed with uh, uh, as we completed with Sepolia stack. Let's
Sure.
go.
So I can just put the quick update for the migration itself. Yep. So we were previously running on Goerli testnet as dPID is still in its beta phase. That was deprecated about 2 weeks ago. So the dev team has been focused on migrating to the Sepolia testnet. And the migration is complete. Everything should be up and working on Orchid. Sepolia should be good to go for around the next 5 years as a testnet. So this should be a one-time issue. But try and publish with Orchid. Let me know if you have any issues.
Okay, okay. Next time, probably, I'm pretty sure that we will try this together with Linda because she has freshly registered Orchid. Then it would be quite a good test.
Perfect.
Okay, so the next point for us is conference presentations. I think no one will say anything about using the presentations placed on our Google Drive as a template for further ones.
I have no issues and have made quite a few of them.
Okay.
Use whatever's up there. It's all open.
Ecco.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, so I have a problem with my PC.
Okay. Okay, then at least you can hear us now. So this is agreed. Is agreed. Then it's a discussion on dPID versus DSI. So Castedo, can you do a quick introduction about what are you thinking and what are you working on?
Sure. So I've been starting. So it partly prompted by the post on Scholarly Kitchen.
Yeah.
There was, and this is probably a question that's going to come up, again at some point somewhere, which is people contrasting Git to what dPID, what you guys are working on, or dPID compared to DSI, or document succession identifiers. So what I was thinking, so the thought on the link that I sent is a document that is, I've started it with a bunch of facts of me just trying to kind of learn about dPIDs and learning the stuff that you guys have built. Because initially I just wasn't sure what you guys have built. And of course I know the stuff I've been developing pretty well. And so I've been just trying to figure out like what corresponds to what and what are things that are not necessarily exactly the same, but roughly corresponding. So just trying to get just the facts down of like what's different between the two. In a neutral way. I mean, there's a separate set of topics, which is, beliefs that like I might have that say you guys would agree with, or, vice versa, or things. But I think there's a lot of useful information that's just neutral. It's just like anybody, regardless of what they decide makes sense or what they like or what, whatever, maybe they're just trying to make sense of, what stuff is. So anyway, so that's kind of the motivation of this document. I turned it into a base print document because I like the dog food stuff, but I actually don't really care particularly what it is. It actually kind of, as I was debating like, oh, where should this thing live on what website? And I was like, oh, I just make it a document of succession because that's kind of, it's supposed to be kind of independent of websites, but.
Just a little remark before I forget about this. Would you like to have it as let's say an ideation document of a blog post for RDA Alliance?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I'm kind of agnostic as to where it shows up. It's mainly, I mean, it's not, there isn't blog post software that can just ingest a document succession today. I mean, I like that idea that eventually that you could cross post kind of documents like this, and it could be kind of anywhere, And because it has the identifier, someone knows that, yeah, I can read it on this site or some other website, or it doesn't matter. So, but of course, realistically, whatever's the blog post on the RDA website doesn't automatically do that. But I'm fine with the idea, maybe copying it, or just having a cheesy,
Exactly.
copy.
What would be planned to do, because the RD Alliance, they are checking now and renewing their website, and it's promised to be quite good also as a blog platform, and they promised to me to improve their moderation mechanism, so it will be probably much faster, and a lot of people will share them, these posts, so we can just to improve their dissemination.
Right. But yeah, I think it'd be, it's probably worth trying out. The one caveat being that it might be slightly confusing in that if there's an update, then, like, would a new edition show up automatically on RDA website? I don't think it's a big deal, because I don't think this thing is going to be like needs to be revised or new editions need to come out. But in general, yeah, I'm fine exploring. I mean, the main thing is just getting the facts down and getting something written that, if I'm pointing people to it, I can feel like, okay, this is something where, like, all the DSI folks and I this is how we see things. And if you want to hear my, hot takes, go over this other place, or you want to hear their hot takes or whatever, go over there, whatever it may be, something like that.
And thank you for doing it in more of a non-confrontational fashion.
Sure.
The facts down first.
Yeah.
There are controversial opinions everywhere, but it's good for us to start aggregating some of these alternative identifiers as we hopefully move towards enhanced PID systems. So
sure. Yeah, definitely agree. Yeah, and it gets tricky. Some of these terms that get thrown around, I mean, even with like, as I was developing my stuff of intrinsic identifier, and so, people can get worked up about, like, is an identifier intrinsic or is it extrinsic, or, even there, a lot of times it gets in a gray zone, where, you could kind of argue that a DSI isn't really intrinsic because, it only, it doesn't get, but I would argue it actually really is, but it's kind of gets in this gray zone. But
yeah, because the ontology here, it is becoming important. Once you should have a controlled vocabulary, and then the things which is Slava doing right now. Yeah, so we can align with this.
So
yeah, please.
Oh yeah, so looking at that, I don't know if we want to go in. I mean, do anyone have any, or has anyone looked at it and kind of had immediate reactions of something that's kind of off? I mean, I haven't like totally understood everything that you guys are working on, so I don't. There might be important distinctions. I mean, I definitely have tried to make the distinction, or I thought it's useful to readers that, and the DSI stuff does not really have an equivalent to an alias registry or a short version of it. I mean, it's similar in that with the DSI, if you're going to use it as a direct identifier, it's not going to be short, whereas a dPID can be very short, and that seems like a very relevant, important difference. But at some fundamental level, it's kind of like a DSI is kind of really, there isn't really an alias registry. Yeah, I don't know if there are other reactions people had or clarifications that you think should be made in the document.
I haven't had the time to go as far in depth into it as I want to, because there's a lot more that I have to learn about DSI as a whole. But I think based on just kind of the basics that I saw, and we can share the screen and talk about it if you want, it seems like, as I understand it, DSI is a lot more similar to the work that Software Heritage is doing, and dPID is more targeted at data itself. Given the challenges around moving and transporting information. So how do we properly identify multi-terabyte data sets? But yeah, I mean, we can share it and talk through it if folks on the call are interested. Andre, do you have any immediate thoughts?
Well, as Linda is with us, could we jump for a time to the artwork identification stuff we have? Because tomorrow is a little presentation I should give for the journalists. So let me share my screen and to open the short text I prepared for doing the presentation.
Sure, we can do that, but I do want to jump back to everything Castedo is saying because it's important for us
Yeah,
to
we will
get the
return
right
to
text.
this. We will return to this. I know that Linda is a teacher also, so she wouldn't have a bit of uh, wouldn't have a much time. So let's jump to this.
Okay.
So this is a short text for a talk I prepared last evening. So what are you thinking, Linda? Your thoughts? Did you have a look up at it?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I read what you write, and so I have already speak with the journalists, and so we prepare comunicato stampa in English. How I can
Uh,
say
yes,
the article. Yeah, so the
printed
article
article.
that we. Okay. Yes. So I think that the procedure is that okay. Tomorrow we have a little presentation,
Yeah.
okay, and we speak. Andre speak. Make a little interview with what is right on this text, okay. So I will translate for Italian journalists, and I think that it could be necessary to have another one meeting only with journalists to show them how to use this this procedure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And tomorrow we have a Facebook live on
Direct
Facebook.
broadcast.
Yes, and I think that if you are interested, you can follow, okay, and listen what Andre speak during the
Well,
conference. Yeah.
can you drop the link now to the chat?
No, because you can find it on the Le Vie delle Foto Facebook. It will
Ah,
be
okay.
one
Okay,
una
so
diretta,
I
one.
will drop it down on Mattermost.
Yeah.
Okay. And Linda, can you share the link to the article and I'll take a pass at it and just see if there's anything that needs to change.
So I can send it by mail to Andre because now I'm with the phone, okay, and I
Okay,
can do it.
just do it, and I will share then the link.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll do a one-on-one with journalists. We'll do a quick review of the text on the highlighted topics for the notes, just kind of cleaning that up, and then a one-on-one with journalists later on. And is that everything that's needed for this?
I think now we should collect just a bit of ideation on this short talk. Eric, we need your expertise because you are an expert in the marketing stuff. So what do you think about this text?
Well, I'll say I'm not an expert in marketing, but thank you. That's very flattering. I think the biggest thing, it's a little too technical for where I would kind of take it. A lot of what we had on the one pager, the slide around DPIDs, if you don't mind, I'm going to grab screen sharing real quick.
Just a sec. I will stop mine.
Yeah, so I mean, really, what I tried to go for was the benefits to an end user. The idea that someone can own their identifier, that their identifier can change with their artwork, that identifiers can be a social mechanism for interactions between different parties, that there's a lot more we can do with an identifier than just purely archiving data. So if anything, I'll probably remake it to mirror a lot of the wording that's on this page and abstract away a lot of the technical details, as that's probably not something that a journalist is going to be interested in the first place. Does that make sense, Linda? Kind of going more towards the benefits for users as opposed to the technical details?
Yeah, please. Yes, turn on your microphone, please, Linda.
No, I'm so sorry. I don't understand the question because I was looking for the text I'll send to Andre now. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll remake the text that Andre wrote to be a little less technical and a little more focused on the benefits for users, what they can expect to get out of using technology. Does that make more sense for the Facebook Live event?
So, okay, I think that the right answer, the right mm, mm, the right way to oh my god, I don't know how I can explain in English. Sorry. So I think that the good answer could find so we can see tomorrow because all the photographer will be there tomorrow and we can understand what they think. I don't know if I could explain. So I think I think that it could be so this procediment could be interested for the photographer to sell um more expensive their photo because so they have a certificate.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like what I've indicated in the poster that we are can generate a dPID and QRize it on the authentication certificate of authenticity, and then it actually due to the social mechanisms underlying it can increase the actual value of the photographs the photographer want to sell to the, let's say, somehow a customer, gallerist, or someone else.
Yes. So tomorrow we can understand how responds the photographer in a real time tomorrow during the conferenza stampa because there is not only the press, okay, there is the photographer that will participate to le vie delle foto, okay, because I think it is really important um, accessory for a photographer, for an artist, but because I work in the photography by 20 years. Okay, I do this work. So I do this work for 20 years. I think it is really important for them. So, so when you sell your opera, okay,
Your
and you need something
opera
to
is
give
artwork.
to the person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
opera is
okay, to the
artwork.
artwork. Yeah.
Yes.
Makes perfect sense. So I'll remake the text to be around that. It'll be a great call on Facebook. So it'll be remaking the text one-on-one with journalists, and then cleaning up the wording for Facebook to focus more on this will help your artwork sell for more. It'll help people trust your work. Sound good?
Okay.
Literally. And well, I will appreciate any help because this evening probably I will not have too much time to edit this text. And Lind also need to have a bit of time to translate it to Italian. Or I can do, but it will be Google Translate.
Okay. Well, I'll get that done before we log off today. But I know we have a packed agenda. Is there anything else around artwork identification?
Well, Linda, did you try to work with
No,
notes?
I'm sorry. I was not able because in this day I am going to the city to put on the exhibition.
No,
Sorry.
I think we should not worry about this, and probably I will try to
So
prepare some video.
I think that tomorrow morning we can try it uh,
In a
during the
demonstration, and I will
conference.
try to
I hope
also to
it
create a
works.
short video. Yeah, I will
I
try
hope
also
it
to
works.
yeah to create a short video for us with a demonstration.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
then we can return to Castedo's stuff while you are trying to formulate Castedo. Can we return to yours?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try share. Oh, that's better. Yeah. Why don't we,
Thank
I'm
you.
not sure whether screen sharing will work on my Linux, old Linux computer. But yeah, if you link on the mirror, I'm sorry, not the mirror, the pages, the web page link.
Yeah, and I also wanted to suggest you, Castedo, to place the links to GitLab. otherwise from GitHub, because it's just better to place a link to the repository on which the main work is happening.
Right. Yeah. It's. Yeah. Actually, it's. I have a shortcoming right now, which is I have this fancy base printer kind of. I have a
Yes.
GitHub Action, and I don't have an equivalent thing for GitLab.
Yeah, I didn't have the time, unfortunately, to dig into your GitHub action, but probably it will be easy enough to convert it.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm always, sorry, I'm going a little off tangent here, but yeah, I'm really torn between GitLab and GitHub. I haven't quite figured out like when to use one versus the other. And I've kind of been figuring that just mirroring is kind of the one approach, which is like, I love that GitLab doesn't have the kind of vendor lock-in that GitHub has. But on the flip side, like, most of the world uses GitHub. Frankly, the GitLab UI is like horrible. I mean, it is so user unfriendly. Like you go to GitLab I send someone there and I feel like I'm sending them into the cockpit of a 747. It's just like, you're overwhelmed. So anyway,
I don't know. I love GitLab to be honest, because I was administering it for 4 years.
yeah, I mean, I think it's partly just this like fundamental trade-off. I mean, just this like difficult reality, which is commercial. A lot, there's this tendency that the commercial stuff that has vendor lock-in is just, more popular and polished and simplified, and then the uber geek stuff that's open and is like really advanced and has a gazillion more things, which I often like, but I just know that other people don't. So anyway.
It's a question of money. Making that kind of a polished interface is not cheap.
Yeah. Well, and also just kind of the target audience, because I think also the target audience, it's like, most people like, if I just survey my family member, like I'm not even sure half of them even know what the word vendor lock-in would mean. And they kind of don't care. They're kind of like, whatever, like it's nicer. So, how many people kind of are like, is the SourceForge open source? Like, I'm not sure about like, just, you kind of have to be an Uber geek to care about that stuff. And then if you're an Uber geek, I'm like with Andre, it's like, I kind of like the cockpit of a 747. It's like, I like all that control, but most people don't. So anyway. Sorry, going off tangent.
So it might be helpful, especially since this is a recorded YouTube call, to give a little bit of an introduction to DSI, what you're doing for anyone watching.
Okay.
And kind of some of the intentions behind it. Would you mind?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm kind of off the top of my head. So it overlaps a ton with dPID. And I think like dPID, there's a focus on an identifier that you could embed into a citation. It's a bit more narrow and special cased compared to a DSI node, in that a DSI node is much more general. The target in the object that's being targeted can be lots of things. Whereas document succession identifier, although in theory it could also be things other than documents, could be like something very general like data, like a node. I haven't been documenting it that way or focusing on it. And in the end, even if the object wasn't a document, it's very different than a DSI node in that the DSI node can scale to a massive quantity of data, and the way things are implemented right now, that scaling would not happen with the document succession identifier. So I think it's fine for documents, but if when we're talking about like, your idea of a node where it's like a whole bunch of stuff like that document succession identifier is not great from that standpoint. So they're very similar in that respect. I think similar to, and part of my interest is that the root hash, in I think for the most part, and again, I have a partial understanding of DSI node and the cool technology you guys have been building, but I think the root hash of a node is really what corresponds more to a base DSI, in that they are hashes, they are intrinsic identifiers. There's a little bit of a special treatment with DSI in that there's an intended textual representation. And because a DSI hash in its current implementation is, I guess, is it like 40 bits or 80 bits? I can't remember how many bits, but however, whatever SHA-2 is, or SHA-1, I'm blanking out on some of my numbers here, but whatever is the hash that's used by Git, which is not huge. It's not, you know, 250, it's not SHA-256. It's smaller than a root hash of a DSI node. So there's a bit of a trade-off in that it's a smaller hash, but that means if you represent it in base 64, it's just, I think 27 characters. So it's, you know, it's kind of long. It's actually not that much longer than your like median DOI. I think one of the things I found amazing about DSI, and then a little bit why I went down exploring this path, is that if you take a Git hash and you express it in base 64, you get something that you can copy and paste. You know, it's not human friendly, it's URL friendly, but you know, it's something you can actually copy and paste, and it's about as long as a lot of DOIs. You know, like every time I see a DOI that's long, I go counting it and see how many characters, and when it's actually longer than a DSI, I'm like, yes. You know, like it could have been a DSI and actually be intrinsic in that respect and not need a registry. So anyway, so I don't know if it comes out in the document, but I thought one good way to describe to audiences kind of some of the subtleties between, say, a dPID and a DSI is whether it's human friendly versus URL friendly, and that a DSI is URL friendly, but it's not human friendly. And I thought that's a nice kind of distinction. Because I do think, and I have optimized a DSI to be more URL friendly or more friendly than, say, a SWID, a software hash ID, which are just really long. When you express it in hex, it gets quite long. And a DSI, because it's base 64 and it's 27 characters, I mean, it's annoyingly long, but it actually kind of fits. Like in this example that we're screen sharing, you know, I've got a citation over there in this tiny left column that's pretty narrow, and you can actually fit a DSI in there, you know, like it barely fits, but it actually fits, which I think is, I think is kind of cool. Anyway, that all said, to be honest, I have come of the opinion that there should be a way for authors to upgrade to a DOI. So as much as I've been motivated to do something that's a complete alternative to DOIs, I actually think for pragmatic reasons, there are many good reasons that an author might want to, you know, upgrade a DSI to a DOI, just for this, you know. Now whether long term that would continue to be the case, like, you know, I don't know, but just realistically in the short term, there's just so many reasons to potentially take
upgrade as in indexers and CRIS systems and credit and H-index or other.
Yeah, I mean, one of them is Zotero, is so that it shows up in Zotero. And I think also just mentally I mean, I would say like all of my colleagues, you know, if I say DSI and I talk about some new thing, like if something is a DOI, people get it. I think there's also this interesting subtlety, and I think it's worth noting, because I feel like with some of these PIDs, I feel like there's this kind of this phenomena of like PID wars, right? Or it's like, or identifier war, URI wars, where everyone's trying to grab the prefix. You know, it's like, you know, for a while, it's like everyone wants the, like, you know, my thing : you know, and blah, 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 because it's like everyone's fighting over what should be that coming before the colon. And then now and then of course, there's always this people trying to grab domains and they want something going to their domain. And of course, one of the things I find annoying about DOIs is the fact that it really encourages, I guess, domain capture maybe is the right term, or domain lock-in, where it's like, you know, like Zenodo is a good case. Like I mean, Zenodo is great for a lot of things, but one thing I find annoying is that from my perspective, there's no reason they shouldn't be including an intrinsic identifier in their IDs. You know, it's like they're storing literally what could be a Git hash, or it could be like the IPFS probably is some hashing thing. But basically, we have a couple of algorithms where you can take something like what's inside of a zip file or what's a directory and turn it into a hash. and like why Zenodo feels the need to generate this totally random identifier rather than a hash. Like I don't know. It seems not the right approach to me.
Oh well, that because they are not using the concept like DAG, and this is always a reason. And I'll also have a question for you. You are using a Git tree.
Yeah.
So, what do you prefer to use for a really large repositories of the data? Because in your concept, the data are represented as a repository. Uh, it is better to use the concepts like DAG or the concepts like Git tree. Because it's an open question, because DAG also contains intrinsic integrity check, while Git tree does not. Does your tree implement it using an intrinsic check or not?
Is whatever is in Git. So in a lot of ways, this what's implemented, and there's also it's worth noting a subtlety, which is DSI versus the DSGL. So I tried to separate DSI, which is more just a conceptual idea in a particular textual format, from the document succession Git layout, which is what I currently have implemented and what I'm currently dogfooding. But document succession Git layout, so DSGL. I mean, it's a total hack, right? I mean, it's totally a look. You could actually achieve some of these cryptographic behaviors of that you guys have also achieved with the root hash of a node, where you have an intrinsic identifier for something, but you actually have versioning. You actually have a way to walk a DAG. And I think that's one of the really cool things that I think independently we've both kind of discovered, is that you can do that. And I don't know a lot of people kind of realize that. A lot of my motivation is the number of times I've encountered people will say things like, "Oh, you can't use a hash or intrinsic identifier because then you can't change it." And it's like, well, you actually kind of can. I mean, if you have a DAG and you have some mechanism, in your case, you guys are relying on, I guess, a ceramic stream, and there's a bunch of details I don't totally follow. But you have a way where maybe you're starting out with kind of an initial record. And one can argue about, is that really the only thing that's intrinsically identified? But if you have a DAG, you can walk it. So in my case, the DAG is the Git history. So I'm in some ways not using a repository. I'm using just a chain of Git commits. So my guess is there are some more advanced features of checking that you're referring that. My guess is probably a Git history, just a chain of Git commits, doesn't have that, but I'm not sure.
Well, here, because I have some experience in studying the source code of Git and working in the C++ on the, let's say, the hash tables, so I can say that in this concept, always the question would be placed that why we have, because would we have. The question is, would we have a situation when one of the nodes of, let's say, actually an intrinsic DAG we are formulating with our repository is becoming, let's say, invalid? As, for example, we are trying to amend some commit in the Git tree. And if during this amendment we are losing the actual object, and we have only the hash but not an actual object to reproduce it, then we have a collision inside the DAG. But in the extrinsic DAG that is done in CID, it's quite impossible. Yes, it's implementation dependent, but these situations are impossible. In Git, it's pretty easy to create.
And you're talking about a situation where there is a hash collision.
No, absolutely not. Imagine that you have a bare metal repository to be stored on the server, and in one of the iterations of update, you have lost one of the hashed objects inside the server-side repository, but you don't have these objects anymore in any of client-side repositories.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this would be a collision that is probably impossible to recover. Otherwise, you should have an external backup.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm not following why you call it a collision, but I think you are one thing that if I understand correctly, and I think it is definitely a bad scenario, is you could in theory replicate these document successions encoded in DSGL?
Well, in theory, yes. In theory, yes. But as we are developing the persistent identifier, we should always have, we should always keep in mind the worst possible possible scenario to have the metadata persistent. Yeah, it's let's say here I consider this as a basic thing because as we don't have a persistent underlying repository, we don't have a persistent identification because this is about metadata. As we have lost one of the points in the history of the metadata object, the identifier should not be considered persistent.
Okay, and this is you're making a kind of definitional point here that it shouldn't be called.
Here, yes, because as a former aerospace engineer, I have a bit of time working in the theory of persistence.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt. I mean, I'm sure, and I think there are a couple of papers that go into all these different meanings of what does persistence really mean? You know, what really qualifies as persistent? Like, yeah, no, I mean, no doubt there are many definitions where a document succession identifier, you could say, oh, it's not really persistent because, you know, XYZ. But yeah, and I'd be happy to document all those different things. I mean, at a pragmatic level of persistent identifier, I mean, I think most of the people using the term persistent identifier, I mean, I mean, I think they're using the term in a very high level way in terms of just to what extent can you rely on it in the future.
Exactly. But to obtain this is what I mean. To obtain this, we should, let's say, put a mattress over the stones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I mean, and this is actually Git history and the Git repository 3, especially the bare metal repository 3, doesn't provide. And this is why I'm asking you: is it possible to implement in your concept or not? Now it seems possible.
Yeah, I guess I am not totally following all the technical details. I think I'm happy to go into more of like what is the kind of internal checks that you're talking about. The only thing I understood so far that you were talking about is just the fact that when you replicate repositories, you technically could have like the Git commit records, but not the digital objects, not the actual, like, I mean, the DAG might have missing pieces. Like when you do a pull and you say fetch not all the history, like I forgot what the option is in Git, but like, you know, you can, you know, pull a Git repository and say don't fetch all the leaves. You know, you're not going to have, you know, it's not so yeah, basically I'm, you know, whatever issue there is with Git as it is currently implemented, a document succession implemented in DSGL has that issue. Now that said, a DSI, you know, I mean, I've documented as this pretty generic thing and just point out that the hash, there are a lot of ways, because it starts out with a hash, there are a lot of ways that it could be a longer hash, or there's a couple of bits at the end that you can basically set for it to be a different meaning. So in theory, you know, that textual format could be used for a lot of other mechanisms that might have much stronger properties than how Git is currently today implemented. But what I have implemented right now is basically this like easy hack, which is just like do it in this weird way within Git. So I guess what would be the other aspect of this document succession that is interesting and is an interesting contrast or might be a source of confusion is the SSH signing key. So one of the things that I do, and again, it's very much a, you know, hack. I think one possible way of thinking about some of the trade-offs and slightly different approaches that we've been taking is kind of the time frame of how soon people might use it, and whether something is like prototype versus beta versus alpha versus, you know, and so the most part, there are a lot of trade-offs I've made that are very much motivated by a desire that like, I want to start using this for my own stuff, like ASAP. And unfortunately, I've discovered that it's just taking me a lot longer than I thought. But I'm very much in a dog fooding mode where it's like,
yeah, the thing here is the SSH signing key is always intended to be lost by the particular user.
yeah. So there's definitely one danger. I mean, or barrier to entry is that. Well, there are two scenarios. There's one scenario where I, as an author, am a geek and I actually keep track of my own SSH signing keys, and I kind of know what they are and I have them on my hard drive and whatnot. And then there's a different scenario, which is I am not a total uber geek and I'm using some website or service that's holding onto those SSH keys for me, and they're going to throw them away and whatnot. So they're those are two kind of slightly different scenarios. In both of those scenarios, for slightly different reasons, the SSH key may be lost. I mean, clearly, if it's an individual, like my laptop right now, well, just for the sake of argument, let's say I have the SSH signing key that I'm using for document succession. I lose it because my laptop, falls into the garbage. It's actually, I don't think it quite sounds as bad as it is, because this SSH signing key, you only need to use it for one document succession. I mean, it depends how you're using it. I mean, I think a good way to use the SSH signing key is that you'd really kind of only use it for document successions. And usually document successions, I think, would have a lifetime where someone's just doing a number of additions. They wouldn't even necessarily do very many additions. I mean, how many versions of a preprint do people do? Usually it's not that many. So I think it's not a huge tragedy if someone loses the SSH key for a document succession. It basically just means they can't amend it anymore. And so now there's this document succession that's floating out there that they can't amend because they lost the SSH key. So they have to use some other document succession identifier.
The questions I have here is it really needed to amend the points in the identified by PID?
And I'll chime in on this one with some thoughts. In the way that academia currently works, no, probably not. But I could see very interesting systems being built around the concept of versionable and dynamic cap tables for research projects themselves. One of the things that's been thrown around quite a bit in more the larger DSI ecosystem where I work is the idea of dynamic cap tables. So if you can imagine being an early career researcher trying to figure out what you want to contribute to as your thesis kind of first project, dipping your toes in academia, if you just come up with an idea, you've got, honestly, it's up to chance as to whether or not you find novel results, as to whether or not your career moves forward at the same pace as your peers. It would be fascinating to think about people contributing to the work of others, similar to how you would see open source contributions in Git, and continuing to grow a research project, having someone be added on to the citations of a research project if they make a meaningful enough contribution. So it's not to say that in the way we see academia today, that is 100% necessary, but I think kind of rethinking that could actually bring beneficial changes.
So I'm not sure I totally understood the question, but the reason for being able to amend the document succession is just the same reason that someone can post a new version of a preprint. So they post version 1 of a preprint and they want to post version 2, and they want to be able to print however many updates they want. They want to be able to add another preprint. So that's my motivation, is just that you put out a scholarly document, or whatever you want to call it, a document that you're sharing broadly. It can go across many websites. And then you, for whatever the reason may be, maybe it's a really small reason, maybe it's big. I mean, that's for the author and the community to decide, but you want to push out an update. And this is a mechanism for doing that. And the identifier, the base DSI remains the same. And there's a little addition number on the end. So that's the motivation.
This was a question. Is an underlying tree immutable or not? In your concept, it seems immutable. So yeah, this.
Yeah, each snapshot is immutable. The document succession, you can keep amending to it. So that's just a Git history. That's basically a Git history.
So it's let's say not a trivial Git history, because in the trivial Git history you can, for example, roll back and amend some commit. Here it is not possible.
Correct. Yeah, and it's totally, admittedly, super hacky what I do. But one of the weird things about the Git layout, so the document succession Git layout, is that the history of additions. So there are all these additions. They're actually in every single tree of every single commit. So it's not like you're actually using the Git history as the history of the additions. It's not at all. They're actually decoupled. So every time you add an addition, you're actually adding another directory in the Git trees of the commits. And something that is potentially confusing is that if software is conforming to the specification, the very first addition that shows up is the correct one. It doesn't matter what future commits do. So if you're, and I've been playing around a little bit with how I write a spec, because I've been trying to write the spec in a very kind of non-prescriptive way. I don't know whether it's a great idea or whether it's going to work, but I've been trying to write it in a very kind of descriptive way to just document interoperability rather than the tone of a lot of standards where they're trying to say like, this is how everything should be done. So I've been using the term garbled, where I'm just describing, what does an ungarbled Git layout look like? And that is, once you commit an addition, you don't change it. Now, if for some reason the layout, the Git record gets garbled, you ignore everything afterwards. Whatever was the first commit for an addition, that's it. That's the truth. That is the version of record in a sense for that addition. And any amendments that come later on can't change that. Now, there is this feature I have in mind, which is the idea that you could actually, and in some ways it's kind of in the spirit of retraction, but that you can delete it. So that you can say, actually, for some reason, this addition should now be ignored. And the spirit of it is that any UI that's displaying it can, remove it or have an asterisk or have some way where it can basically say, okay, the authors apparently wanted this addition to disappear from the record or be hidden or demoted or whatever. You can still see it because it's part of this kind of scholarly record, but for whatever reason, they want it to just be like, really demoted somehow. I don't know. This is getting into a lot of corner cases, and there are a lot of interesting corner cases that the DSI and the Git layout kind of create because, in theory, you could have forking, right? You could have something where, authors, even though maybe just by their own mistake, and it really amps up the risk when you've got software heritage, this software heritage archive involved, that they, for whatever reason, there's a fork that gets out there. And how do they resolve it? And how do you kind of reconnect all the addition history if they did that? But in general, the general idea is that, there's a baseline normal scenario that happens 99.9% of the case, which was, SSH keys haven't been lost. Authors aren't, fraudsters. People are just trying to have a record of what they've done. And so there are various ways if something gets garbled. So, there are ways that the Git records maybe aren't the ideal, but that there's a standard way that UI tries to recover, okay, what may have happened here. So anyway, so that's the idea. And I'll admit, when I started out with this project, I had the mindset very much of, everything should be intrinsic identifiers, this is an alternative for DOI, not use DI, have no registry, just intrinsic identifiers only. That was a bit of a goal, or at least a design goal. As I've gotten closer to reality and tried it out myself, I realized that there are a lot of scenarios where I think having some kind of registry makes sense. And, the reality is, as time goes on, there may be there are lots of legitimate reasons that you might not want to purely rely on only an intrinsic identifier just because of, reality. I experienced this early on because the initial version of this Git layout was using GPG keys rather than signing keys, rather than SSH signing keys. And I didn't understand Git well enough to realize that there is actually kind of a fundamental problem with using GPG keys because you can basically, you can't verify, you can't verify it. You need to get the signing key for somewhere else. Whereas the SSH keys, the public key is actually stored inside the digital succession in the Git layout. So as you're recording commits, you're always recording the SSH public key that says, this is the key that is allowed to amend this document succession. And you can change it. So there are actually some interesting scenarios where, like, I might start out with the document succession where I'm the only author and I'm the only key, but then other authors pile in, and then their keys get added. So any of those authors could actually amend it. So anyway, but anyway, my point being that I had an earlier version of DSI that I decided to ditch because it was just had a flaw. And so I had all these documents I had written with an intrinsic identifier to this algorithm that I no longer wanted to use. And it was a pain in the ass to change. I mean, it was like, I had to go through all these documents, find all the links, like everything that was using that other intrinsic identifier, changing it all, total pain. But it was a reminder, just the aspect that, like, there are a lot of great things about intrinsic identifiers, there are a lot of great things about hashes, but there are all these like corner cases where potentially at some point in the future or some corner case, you might need to, do something else. And I see a lot of value in various kinds of registries that can compensate for that. So anyway, the reason I mentioned that is just a lot of these corner cases where like things fall apart are potentially mitigated by having, an overlay of some kind of registry where people can rely on this registry for these corner cases. And I think that's okay. I don't think that's a huge deal. I think.
About the registries, I could say if the registry is not, let's say, truly decentralized, then we cannot consider the whole system is truly decentralized, because once you don't have, let's say, the registry reproducible without a condition, then someone just would try to compromise it.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of definitions of decentralized. There's a pretty strong definition of decentralized that you guys are very much interested in, and I'm trying to build this stuff to be somewhat agnostic to that. So I mainly focus, definitely very motivated to maximize interoperability and support interoperability. I personally am okay with some centralization. Like I don't have a beef with Crossref. So anyway, for the most part, I would just say there are all these trade-offs. There are different kinds of dependencies that like I might personally want differently. But in terms of the technology that I'm been developing, I definitely want to, be able to support interoperability. So there may be scenarios where it's like, yeah, you could use a DSI with these other registries or different types of registries, or, that get overlaid. I think that's fine. I think to some extent, I'm kind of guessing that where DSIs are useful is, and I like the term upgrade. I've been kind of using that, although maybe there's a better term, but this idea that, you can have documents that start out with only a DSI, they're just this big long hash. And at some point in the history of the document, someone then gets another identifier that's, better, that also points to that same document succession, and in a sense kind of upgrade it. And that other identifier might be totally different because maybe it's really short. There's also another, and this is going back to what I was talking about earlier in this talk about like PID wars and prefix wars, where, you could have a DSI, and I actually have made this specification point this out of being agnostic about the prefix, where it's just saying, you can have a DSI in an identifier and you can have a bunch of stuff before it, and that's fine. So you can have a DOI, or you can have other identifiers where the suffix is a DSI, and that's fine. So you can still have a registry. And it's a little bit this point I made on that kind of big controversial thread on the forum, on the PID forum, which is, I don't really agree with that person's statement where they're like, oh, I don't know about intrinsic identifiers because, that you can't rely on a registry. And it's like, well, you have a choice. You don't have to. I mean, you can have a registry. You can have someone maintaining a mapping between intrinsic identifiers and something else, and that's fine. It's just the main thing I think that is special about intrinsic identifiers is that you don't have to, and that's an interesting property that I think can be valuable.
No, and I agree with you. And ultimately, the point I see around decentralization is less decentralization for the sake of control and governance and all of that, and more so just the idea that protocols will be more scalable as we reach just larger volumes of files, as we start thinking about fair data and everything around code management at scale. It's important for us to have established protocols, and then beyond that, it's also interesting to think about the idea of data sovereignty. So how the decentralized web and kind of shared ownership, replication of information can facilitate, I guess, ownership of data across boundaries. So keeping one single group who, let's say, publish the data from also being the one to store the data and have access to close off the data. So, I mean, to me, those are the real reasons for decentralization itself. But it's different, and I completely agree with you on everything around PID wars. And I don't fully understand it, but I've definitely seen it and experienced it. Ultimately, all of these PIDs are going to have to work together to make anything meaningful. So.
Yeah, in one aspect of decentralization that I am kind of trying to work towards, and hopefully with success, and one aspect of centralization that I really don't like right now is the siloing of how these papers are stored by all the different journals. And my main beef is the lack of author autonomy to update them and correct them. And I think it's so in that, and then that relates to the stuff with JATS that I've been trying to get at is the, I am hoping that there is some kind of open source based coordination of a lot of these different libraries out there and a lot of different places that are partly doing JATS. And I think there's a degree of decentralization. There is one scenario of decentralization. It's a very narrow one that I want to see happen and to be able to enjoy, which is I, as an author, write a document on my own computer, and I can see and I can actually produce the JATS package or something like it, but something that is the thing that will be redistributed to anyone, not just the journal where it's going to get published or just the preprint server where it's stored or wherever it is. But that package, that thing I output that's web friendly, it can go anywhere and can be redistributed anywhere, and I can still update it. So that's the kind of decentralization that I've been really focused on. And the DSI could be a relatively low level kind of identifier where there might be some higher level thing that's short and human friendly that people like to use. And there may be, various kinds of systems that then map that to a DSI. And I think, that's fine. I think it might be useful for kind of a slightly forensic analysis where maybe someone goes in and like, well, yeah, but what exactly is the thing being referenced? And I suspect that there is a lot of these identifiers and hashes, even though they may not be typically used, like this happens with software packages a lot, where it's like, how often do we actually check the hash of software that we download? We often don't, but the fact that someone's doing it and we know that it's there gives us confidence to trust that it's like, okay, someone's not, this probably isn't the wrong binary because someone wouldn't, even though I'm not going to check, I'm not going to bother checking, but I bet someone else is.
There'd be a comment somewhere. I'd go Google it on Stack Overflow and people would be screaming and I would understand. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I get it. And I'm with you. Ultimately, the one thing I really don't want to see is a series of AWS silos with scientific data. And it's not to say that AWS is bad. It's just to say that, we need the ability to expand outside of any one server and platform, and giving folks the ability to control their identifiers, I think is powerful and meaningful.
And the publishing model you described, for me, it looks really similar that with, let's say, decentralized social assessment model. Yeah, so it could be done, but here is another problem with let's say the personal identifiers. Then we should rethink very thoroughly.
Yeah, one thing I'm not happy about with what I currently have implemented is that GitHub is as it stands right now, kind of acting as a AWS-like silo. So right now, Hedos is the library for working with DSI. The find subcommand is in some ways how you just find whatever's out there for a DSI. So you can do Hedos find and then put a DSI, and it will, wherever, in theory, wherever it is, download it, and you can start merging, all of the places that have this DSI and turn it into, have your own local copy. Currently, the only thing it checks is GitHub. So the only thing that exists there right now, the only DAG where you can take a DSI and discover and get the raw data is GitHub, and not the software heritage archive. And I've sent them kind of a feature description asking whether they're going to enable it, and they partially do. They kind of they have a not super easy way to walk their DAG. But anyway, it's not a super great story. So potentially there's stuff that you guys are working on that is a better, kind of solution to that degree of centralization. But for pragmatic reasons, that's kind of what I'm putting up with right now.
Yeah. So for this, I can agree with you that the issue is, let's say, it exists. It's still very important for the communities we have right now. Because if we could imagine the community like the open source community for a given product, it would be quite even easier, I guess, to have something like decentralized GitLab than the centralized GitHub we have right now. Because, for example, if someone like Microsoft would try to limit the access to GitHub, it should not be possible to do. But anyhow, now it is possible due to the nature of a client-server model of interaction with Git. And this is what, in the current model, we cannot override. Because I was thinking in the past about how to implement the IPFS CID as an internal identifier of Git. To include a DAG as an internal bare-metal repository tree.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite not a trivial task, but it seems to be doable, and it completely would be a supporting thing for the concept you have described to us right now.
Oh, okay.
So I'm completely for it. And the idea of integrating Git, it's floating over us in the air. So I think it would be the huge step for the future, but not for now. Just not to introduce the PID wars, as you describe the term.
So I'll cycle back to ask you questions about that kind of Git. This is the Git bridge thing you're talking about. I think you have like a repo called Git bridge or something. But yeah, I'll ask you more about that with the find subcommand of Hedos.
Yeah.
So in terms of this document, it sounds like there's no one that has considers anything very inaccurate in this.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
I had a quick
There
look.
are a couple small things that I might change here and there, but as a whole, I think it's a good representation.
How soon could you file those as GitHub issues, the small things? Or should I just I kind of want to just get an edition, like a first edition out there.
It's good enough to publish a first edition. I think that's fine as long as, this is based on a versionable identifier. So, I think I'm actually going to be taking a large chunk of the next 2 weeks off for travel and then a week of personal stuff. So you're good for what we have now, and I'll make changes as I can.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Great.
Completely agree. So, would you like to have some time to go for statement of benefits, or would we like to leave right now?
I have time for the statement of benefits as long as I don't have to share my screen, and y'all are okay with me occasionally telling my dog to leave it.
This is not relating to me, right?
No, I mean, it might be useful as you're trying to explain some of the DSI concepts to folks who are non-technical, but you definitely don't have to be here for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'll drop out then. So anyway, so it was great seeing you guys face to face.
Thank you. Yeah. It
Same.
was really
Thanks
nice
for
Okay.
to see
joining,
you.
and thanks for being
Yes.
active on the Mattermost.
Sure. Take care.
Alrighty.
Yeah. So, would you like to have some ideation on statement of benefits?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. What are your thoughts? What should we be ideating on?
I think we could just reduce the amount of bullet points defended by Georgos, and to
Yeah, it was quite a bit. Yeah.
yes, yes, and to create a shortened version again, to then to harmonize with supplementary points you did.
Yeah, I think what I really love about the way that we have it right now, it kind of feels like a pick list
Yeah,
where, based on the use case and the people that I'm talking to, I can select different pieces of information. So, something like, I think, open source and easy to implement, while that may be a huge selling point for someone working in a research infrastructure, for someone who's not looking for customization, let's say a journal who wants an out of the box solution,
yeah.
it's not quite as appealing. So I love the idea of either leaving it as a raw pick list, which is probably too long for any one user, but can be tailored to individual ones. I think that that can be useful, or just pre-tailoring it
Yeah,
to the needs of any given use case. So which of those two would you prefer?
okay. From my point of view, we could just now. I will create a copy in the documents, and we could just remove some points that I think will not be selling points for everyone. Let me see. I will now create a new entry.
Okay, so you're looking for the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, because for example, from the first group, it contains distributed, open source, locally deployed, scalable, and self-regulated. I'm not pretty sold out of a self-regulated point. Would we like to remove it because it's just about assessment, not the nature of the identification process? What do you think?
So this is just the intrinsic identifier, the verifiability.
Mm, yeah, so we can leave it.
Well, no, can you explain to me a little bit more about exactly
Okay,
what you
because
mean by self-regulated?
yeah, because as I was talking with our beamline scientists, when you are talking about something self-regulated, they are imagining the, let's say, self-regulating society, non-commercial organization, or something like that. So they are asking me, what do you expect from us to decide on?
Okay, so is that a question of the point being wrong, or us using the wrong wording for the point?
I think it's about the wrong wording.
So
So
how else can you describe it to me in paragraph format, and I'll see if I can come up with something catchy.
okay, in the little paragraph, I could replace the self-regulation with assessment. So it's like someone would come and under his own or seed place the um, recognition or criticizing the node as it is implemented right now. So this is
Okay, so you're talking about attestations and modular
yeah,
validations.
attestations plus assessment. What will
Okay, so perhaps something with iterative or dynamic assessment could be relevant there as
yes.
a kind of a keyword. How about dynamic assessment?
Dynamic assessment is pretty good here, so I will replace it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the second group is dPID is at zero or low cost solution. Here I don't see anything to delete, but I want to move the words strong community to another group because a low cost solution is not about a strong community.
Well, Kind of. I mean,
Uh,
it's nice to have documentation and the ability for support.
yeah, I think we could move this to dPID assist services.
Yeah,
What?
that's fair.
Okay, so I will move it there.
Yeah.
Great. Then technological strengths. Here I am for elimination of a directed acyclic graph because actually no one tries to understand what does it mean.
Yeah, that might scare off more people than it brings in.
Yeah,
And I mean, ultimately with ceramic, it's not a pure directed acyclic graph. It's something closer to a knowledge graph.
yeah. So would we like to delete this point?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Or we can generalize it. Is there a way that we can make it less technical and potentially more appealing? Maybe like dynamic structure. Are there other ways that we can phrase that? 'Cause I mean,
Uh,
to me, what that says is scalable and verifiable.
yeah. I would say something like verifiable tag cloud. Could we think about it like this?
Did you say DAG cloud?
Verifiable, not a dark cloud, tag.
Tag cloud. Okay, tag cloud. Um, yeah, but would anyone care about that any more than a DAG?
Yeah, so I don't know. Here I don't know.
If neither one of us can immediately say yes, to me the answer is no.
Yeah, so then I think it is better to remove this point.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, do we have something in there around cryptographic linkages? Would anyone care about that, or is it still too
I think
technical?
no. In the scientific community, absolutely, I have never encountered people caring about this. Some data stewards do, but it's actually not relevant.
Okay.
Okay, so then I'm removing this. For we have term knowledge management, so it covers everything here.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Uh, dPID is already here. TypeScript API is great.
Yep.
Custom demos too. Multiple applications are in design. Okay, after the implementation of more or less implementation of experimental artwork use case, it will be all fair enough.
Yeah. I think that's fine.
Yeah. DPID and data governance. Here I have more questions. Assists data management plans. Um, could we say that it's already there?
For data management,
Yeah,
it
management plans.
it depends on who you're talking to.
Uh,
Um, I think I may have a biased perspective on that because I'm close with the Go Fair Foundation, and they are the, I guess, most stringent on data management itself. I think it could be implemented based on what we already have in a better fashion than what's there today. But
yeah.
whenever I imagine it as a flawlessly streamlined workflow, and we're not there yet.
Okay, okay. So,
So I could say facilitate maybe.
yes,
Um,
it would
yeah,
be a right term.
sure.
Facilitates
Probably
data
just
management
nitpicking.
plans. Yeah. About fair compliance, I have no doubts here.
Yep.
Um, yeah, policy enablers and enforcers. Here, I could say I could say I am for removal of this point because it's not clear enough for me.
No, I think that that's actually one that we keep. And I'll tell you exactly what I'm thinking or
Yeah,
what I'm guessing, where I'm guessing George was going in terms of that. So a lot of it comes from some of the FDO concepts and the way that the larger fair community is thinking about enabling policy via identifiers. So I had a great conversation the other day with someone around encoding legal and GDPR statuses directly in metadata. And it was a fascinating conversation. They went over the challenges of taking written word and translating that into JSON LD, which
Yeah.
is by no means an easy task and will always come up with flaws, but trying to find the best possible solution there as a means of enabling machine actionability. And I don't know of any other identifiers who can easily separate out the private metadata that is inevitably going to be a part of GDPR compliance at times with just the standard metadata as it is. So I do think that policy enabling is important.
Yeah.
I think it depends. You're right in the fact that it's a generic term, but it's a powerful point for a lot of different organizations. And I think we can back it up with the requisite knowledge.
Yeah, so we can rephrase this point as dPID assists policy enablers and enforcers.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, great. So we have it rephrased, and as it is in line with the EOSC guidelines, that's absolutely true.
Yep.
So yeah, we can keep it. Uh, as it is assist services, about AI workflows, as we don't have them right now. What do you think about keeping this point?
Well, I think we can definitely say that we assist AI workflows right now, just purely based on payload APIs. So being able to import dPID into a Python library,
Yeah.
that's huge for AI workflows.
So we can say, instead of just putting the words AI workflows, we can say that it provides
Well, I mean,
the entry
ultimately, it's
points.
machine actionability, but there's a very small number of people in the world who understand and or care about what that means.
We can say that it provides the machine actionable way for AI workflow.
Yeah, yeah.
Provides machine
No,
machine
I think just
actionability.
leave it at AI workflows, man. That's too many words. People are gonna
Okay.
zone out. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's as long as we both internally understand what that means and are synchronized, I think it's fine.
Okay. Okay. So I will write something like provides I AI workflows entry points.
Yeah.
Uh, be about the big data problems. So here, do we need to rephrase it? I think no.
No, I think it's fine.
Yeah, okay. Large ID issuing requirements, completely fine.
Yep.
And a strong community, move it here, absolutely fine.
Yep.
Yeah. So go. The next group is maybe applied in many domains. So goes beyond DOIs for publications. Absolutely true and absolutely fair.
Yep.
Uh, art and cultural heritage. Tomorrow we will see.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, we will.
Yeah, I hope so. Data sets at single file level, absolutely true. Physical
Yep.
objects, let's say by design, I could add here the words by design.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Electronic components, absolutely fair.
Yep.
Medical records, once we don't have a rights management system implemented.
I would take that one out.
Okay, so would you like to remove it?
Let's remove that. Yeah, because that gets into all of the compliance and private data issues, and it can
Yeah,
do it.
it's
But
better.
I think that that's a long road to get the proper authentication for in a meaningful and efficient way.
Well, the system is not a long road far from us, but the recognition of this system is really a long path.
Yes,
So
exactly. The bureaucracy to
yeah,
actually get there. Yeah.
and the same with the financial assets. So we will remove these 2 points.
Yeah. And can we put something around like AI models in there?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So in the assisting services, I could say applied in many domains. Let's just write AI models.
Yeah. And then for the publication beyond DOI, let's take out the DOI part and just put scalable provenance for publications.
Yeah, okay.
Honestly, I've kind of found that even just the word provenance can be intimidating to people.
Yeah, you are right. We didn't use it until now. So scalable provenance for publications seems really a good selling point.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, right. And last is dPID current activities. Broad dissemination, seeking early adopters, and completion of the demo, funding,
Yep.
and setting up a governance. I think it's fair enough to keep these points.
Yep, I think that's all good.
Okay, so on these bullet points, we are quite complete. We will say many thanks to Georgos, and
Yes, yes.
yeah, and then we could jump to another supplementary points. But for now, to be honest, I need also to prepare the third round version for the conference in Venice.
Okay,
Yeah.
you focus on that. I will, once I'm back in front of my laptop, will quickly remake what you had for the artwork thing, um, and hopefully review Castedo's document. So,
Great, great, great. So tomorrow I will try to have a recording of our session with Linda.
yeah,
Yeah, and this recording I am creating just right now. Probably I will place it on my YouTube channel immediately and then send to you the IPFS identifier.
okay, that works. And we'll see if it makes sense for the DSI Foundation channel. Part of
Yes,
it
yes.
is, yeah, the artwork identification can be, well, it can kind of distract from the scientific aspect if it's something that doesn't quite mesh. So we just have to be careful with that. So
Yeah,
send it over. Let me know how the call goes, and we'll see if it makes it onto the foundation YouTube channel. Okay.
exactly, exactly. For this recording, you already have all of the permissions to have it on the Design Labs YouTube channel, and I also
Yep.
will send to you the subtitles because I will run Whisper CPP over the video immediately.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then for tomorrow, I will just try. I don't know how will it work, so we will just see.
Give it a shot. I'll be interested to see how it goes. If
Yeah,
it works, that's awesome, and I'm glad we can help people. If it doesn't, that's okay too. We've got enough on our plate with scientific research as it is. So, yeah, should be good.
yeah. So let's see what will happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
Alrighty.
this.
Sounds good. Talk to you later, Andre.
Yeah. See
Bye.
you. See you later.